Hello, David Miller for the CJP Safety and Education Foundation. You have the opportunity today to hear from one of the most knowledgeable members of the aviation community. Unfortunately, Neil Singer is unable to be with us, so Charlie Precourt asked me as the lowest bidder to make this presentation. So, welcome, and let's get started. This morning, we're going to play a little game called CJP Truth or Dare. Picture this. It's 6:10 a.m. on a Sunday morning in your hometown. You're on your way to Starbucks before COVID-19. You stop at the stoplight. There's absolutely no traffic. There's only one stoplight on the way. It's pitch dark. The light is red. You stop at the light. There's not a car in sight. Do you wait for the light to turn green, or do you look both ways and go on? How many of you would run the red light? What if your 9-year-old grandchild is with you? How many of you would run it now? Well, I'm having a little trouble with this risk versus reward concept, and I'm having trouble figuring it out as it relates to jet pilots and how we tolerate risk. Neil Singer and Charlie Precourt do a fantastic job talking about the how and how we do things in our airplanes, or how we use our SOPs. But I want to talk a little bit about the why we do things in the airplane. Over the next couple of episodes, I will take you through some actual flights made by pilots I know. You will not hear me mention their names, and my goal is not to place blame or be overly critical, but instead to put you in the cockpit of a real flight and have you experience some of the variables that these pilots experienced. And because I spent an hour at our San Antonio convention talking about some of the questionable decisions that I've made over my 50-year flying experience, I just might be the perfect person to get us started. But before I begin, I hope we are developing a culture within CJP so that our members are willing to share their experiences without fear of condemnation or piling on, even though it's human nature to do so. When you see a post on our website that details an experience one of our members had, you should do two things. The first is post something like this. And the second, then you can say, what the hell were you thinking? No, I'm just kidding. You're free, of course, to think what you like about actions as pilots, but please don't be overcritical when someone makes an effort to share their experience. None of us does everything by the book. We are human beings. We make mistakes. Knowing that, we created the CJP SOPs and the in-flight guides right here, both available for download from our website. And we don't tell you how to fly your airplane, but rather we give you some things to think about when you do. So let's go back to our story. Here we go. Our flight today is in a Mustang. Our pilot has owned it for 10 years. He's in his mid-50s and in good health. He enjoys flying at night, and about 30% of his trips begin and end at night. He does simulator training twice a year and flies 150 to 200 hours a year. He flies mostly single pilot, but takes a right seat mentor several times a year. He makes a frequent trip from Dallas to the Seattle area almost every month with a fuel stop in Wyoming. He does not drink. His personal VFR minimum fuel is 600 pounds. So now let's talk about the specific flight. In late December, he takes his family from Dallas to the Seattle area and stops in Wyoming for fuel. He arrives in Seattle after 10 p.m. Seattle time on a Friday and enjoys time with the family. The next day, he plans to depart Seattle for Addison, and he plans to depart at 10 p.m. local and stop in Colorado Springs for fuel, then on to Dallas. How many of you would make this flight? Well, our CJP SOPs say Do not extend duty day in excess of 14 hours. In a duty day, the definition begins at the start of the day's activities, whether flying related or not, and terminates upon completion of the last flight of the day. Just so you know, the weather in Dallas at his departure time from Seattle is 2,000 overcast and visibility of 6 miles. His scheduled arrival time in Dallas will be 4 a.m. local time. And if he woke up at 8 o'clock in the morning in Seattle and arrives in Dallas at 4 a.m., he will have been awake for 18 hours. You might ask, why did he need to arrive in Dallas at that time? Well, he was scheduled to depart on an international airline flight early the next day. Neil Singer says, taking off at 10 p.m., assuming he was up at normal time, means his performance was seriously degraded way before landing. Estimates are that after being awake 18 hours, performance is equivalent of having a blood alcohol level of 0.05, rapidly consuming 3 drinks. And landing at 4 a.m. local body clock is right around the circadian low. Our SOPs say, limit a duty day to 8 hours if the flight is operated at a circadian low between 0200 and 0600 in the time zone the pilot is operating from. So a little personal story from me. Many years ago, I was returning from Florida with my young family, very young children, and Patty in our B-55 Baron. I remember Patty said, can't we stay just a little longer on the beach with the kids and then fly home? I said, sure. We wound up leaving Florida at about 6 p.m. local time and then trying to outrun a line of thunderstorms almost all the way to Dallas. We landed at Addison after midnight. I still have dreams about that flight to this day. It was not a safe flight. Have you ever had a flight like that? Was it a learning experience? I hope so. Okay, back to the story. Here we go. They depart from Seattle area on time. He climbs to flight level 370. And an hour into the flight, he realizes that he has a tailwind of 110 knots. He can reach Dallas nonstop. He has never done that before. Seattle to Dallas nonstop. Pretty cool, huh? He said, I planned to stop in Colorado Springs, but didn't need to. We climbed on up to 410 and blew home. He decides to go nonstop to Dallas. Well, the weather now at Dallas is 1200 overcast, 6 miles visibility, and there's the temperature, winds, light winds, and there's the temperature dew point. By the way, what's wrong with this slide? Did you find the error? Yeah, it's the temperature dew point spread. The dew point has to be lower than the temperature, not higher. So when I made this presentation at Mackinac Island for a CJP regional meeting, guess who caught the mistake as it actually happened? You are correct, Mark Delude. So back to our story. He planned to land at Addison with a 600-pound reserve. So the question is, was the decision to bypass the fuel stop made under the influence of exhaustion? You know, we all talk about the influence of alcohol, but what about the influence of exhaustion? Would you continue to Dallas? He begins his descent into the Dallas terminal area. He says that the 110 knot tailwind diminished unexpectedly. So what was unexpected about a diminishing tailwind on descent? That's pretty normal, right? Was his belief that the tailwind would be constant made under the influence of exhaustion? Anyway, he arrives on the final approach with 550 pounds of fuel. You know, it's really dark at night. Here's a picture of the ILS approach to runway 33 at Addison. Pretty normal. By the way, the airport is uncontrolled after 10 p.m. He says the weather was good. Really no traffic at 4 o'clock in the morning, right? And I had lots of options. As a matter of fact, it is 4 o'clock in the morning. Addison Airport is known for roaming coyotes. And over the threshold at 50 feet on ref, he makes a normal landing. Now, I bet you thought that I was going to say he saw the coyotes and he had to go around, right? Nope. He made a normal landing. But that's exactly the point. What if he had to go around for any reason? Like a gear problem. What's the go-around fuel required? Well, VFR in a Mustang, it's about 150 pounds. But on this morning, he's going to need to be vectored for an approach. It's 1200 overcast. Tonight, he taxis in with 500 pounds of fuel. A go-around would have left him with 350 pounds or less. The low fuel lights on a Mustang come on at 170 pounds a side, or 340 total. Have you ever landed with the low fuel lights on? Was this a safe flight? Remember, we talk about the definition of a good landing is one we walk away from, but was this a safe flight? Well, Neil Singer says this is a great example of how a suboptimal plan can lead to pressure on safety margins. Once you're in the air and tired, it can seem much safer. As to the fuel reserve, 500 pounds isn't even 45 minutes down at 3,000 feet. If those coyotes were on the runway and he hit one of them, the FAA just might have gotten involved. Then something called 9113, Careless and Reckless, might have been invoked. So we'll tell you a little story, personal story. Years ago, I owned a Saberliner, a 40 model Saberliner, 2 pilots, of course, and my other co-captain, JC, and I didn't plan for the FAA to get involved as we taxied our Saberliner to runway 33 at Addison. I'll show you what happened. It was our first flight after we had both gotten our type ratings. Well, the old Saberliner had a hydraulic pump that you turned off after engine shut down and back on after engine start. Back then, Addison had very narrow taxiways, as you can see, with grass on both sides. And on this morning, the grass was wet from an overnight rain. So as we made the turn, the left turn from the taxiway onto another taxiway, we realized that I was in the right seat and one of us, me, had forgotten to turn on the hydraulic pump, missed it in the checklist. So we lost our braking as we made that left turn, and we rolled just slightly off the taxiway onto the grass. We were stuck in the mud. A 20,000-pound airplane stuck in the mud for 3 hours. And you know how people gather around to see what happened in a car accident? Well, the FAA came out to see what all the crowd was looking at, and they found that we had forgotten to re-register the airplane after we had changed the N number. And they went after JC for 2 years since he was pilot in command. Eventually, they let it go, all because we got stuck in the mud. On this Mustang flight, everyone arrived safe and sound, but was it a safe flight? Perhaps we should ask ourselves, if the FAA gets involved, did I do everything by the book? We try to mitigate risk every time we get in the airplane. We owe that to our passengers and ourselves. Until next time, fly safe.